Alright, now we're done rendering our texture maps. It took about 1 minute and 46 seconds to render all the texture maps we needed. It was pretty fast since the effects weren't that complicated anyways. We didn't have that many nodes. All we had was an erosion effect and a terrace effect with a layout and an advanced purlin. Sometimes it could take about around 45 minutes, an hour, depending on your texture resolution. So all that's left now is to check out the texture output that we have, and start. What else we could do? Yeah, start working on the textures in Photoshop, and start adding some interesting detail to the terrain in Mudbox as well. All right, let's just press OK. Yeah, that's how it looks like with the 2048 texture resolution. Anyways, now that we're done with WorldMachine, we can just save and close. Alright. Yeah, at the same time I'm also uploading the tutorial on YouTube. Okay. Let's close this. Alright. Now let's check out the texture output that we have. So these are all the texture maps that came from WorldMachine. So we got the height map, ambient occlusion map. It works a bit like a cavity map as well. Color map, the position map for the mud. I mean, you can correspond it when you look at a color map. You can kind of guess. So you can easily like add some color variation to your color map by using the position map, for example. You got a flow mask here, yeah, the grass and rock masks, light map, sand mask, the wear map, and the height map. So this one is the final height map that we exported from WorldMachine. What we're gonna do now is actually bring in all these texture maps into Photoshop and start editing these textures to get something interesting. So what we're gonna do is open up Photoshop. Let's hit accept. Alright, file new. This time we'll be working on 2048 by 2048. That's the resolution of the textures we have. Alright. Let's see. Okay. Now the next thing we need to do is open up Mudbox as well at the same time. Now we're gonna save this scene just in case. Alright. Need to wait a bit to write the file. Okay, now start with new project. Import the plane. We used the one that we exported from Maya. Subdivide this plane up to 4 million polygons. Alright, let me see. Yeah, that's 4 million polygons. Now what we have to do is apply the height map that we exported from WorldMachine to this plane. That way we can just easily preview our texture that we're working on Photoshop on the high poly mesh itself. And what's cool about this is that we can even edit the terrain itself. I mean, you could add some extra detail and fix some of the shapes of the terrain if you think you need to fix them. So in order to do that, all you gotta do is sculpt using map. So go to maps, sculpt using maps, new operation, select mesh. It's gonna be mesh. We didn't rename it, so it's probably better if I rename it. That's terrain, high poly, same again. Okay. Now all we need to do is import the height map. Tell what the height map is. Now we need a world machine height map. So it's in a PGM format. Open. Okay. Now usually when you're about to sculpt the height map, you just, alright, I got a height map here. I'm just gonna press go. So you're gonna have to wait a bit. Starts sculpting. And you'll notice that nothing happens. So that's because you need to tweak the multiplier. So you go back to layers, delete your operation, displacement operation, do it again with a higher multiplier. Let's say 16, just for a try. It's just a guess. Still nothing's happening. Alright, so what we could do to fix this problem is just to re-export the height map as in a different format. Remember that Mudbox uses TIF format for 16 bits textures, or the raw texture format. So we're gonna use the TIF format. In order to do that, we'll have to open our height map in Photoshop, the one we exported from WorldMachine. And apparently we still have some problems right here. Let's check what's wrong. Probably, let's try out with Photoshop CS3. Sometimes I've got some issues with CS4 and CS3, and the problems are sometimes completely different in each version. Same problem here. So the problem seems to be related to the texture format at which we exported it. So all we have to do now is actually go back to WorldMachine again, open up the project and re-render. Since we saw that it took about a minute to render, it should be quite fast and won't be that of a problem. So we're gonna open up WorldMachine again, open up the last project file, terrain_tut. Here we go. Okay, now all you gotta do is change the height output, which is right over here. There we go. Now we need to change the format, texture format. Let's try TIF. That's basically usually the format that works best with Mudbox. Okay. Let's render this out a bit. I'll pause the video and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, we're done rendering. Let's see how it looks now in Photoshop. Hope there aren't any complications. There's our TIF file. I think we could basically just directly open it up in Mudbox and use it as a height map. There we go. Multiplier 16, just for first guess. Okay, seems like we got the height map working properly, but the multiplier of 16 seems not to be enough. So we're gonna cancel this operation and do it again with a higher multiplier. Let's try 64. Go. Okay, just a bit better, but still need more. Remove. So 128. 128 seems to do the trick, in my opinion. Let's see. Just need to examine this a bit, you know? There you go. The good thing about bringing this into Mudbox is that you can basically already smooth out some of the stuff you don't want to see inside the game engine itself. I mean, when you apply the height map to the terrain, you'll find some imperfections that you'll be able to fix in Mudbox. Obviously, you could do it in the game engine as well. You can just pick the smooth brush and start tweaking the terrain. But it's always better to tweak it here in Mudbox, since we're gonna later on bake ambient occlusion and some extra texture maps that are going to be useful later for the engine. Okay, maybe I'm gonna do it a bit higher. Let's try a bit higher value. Let's see, 150 maybe. This seems to be a good value. Let's see. Need to set up the field of view like earlier. 50. Not for a side. Perspective camera. There we go. Now what's cool about Mudbox is you can preview the ambient occlusion and cavity maps directly in real time, and somehow like get a good guess at how it's gonna look like when you bake the ones directly into low poly mesh. And you can change the material, get something a bit more white, that way you can pop out the ambient occlusion. Let's try this material and different lighting setups. I kind of like this one, the morning one. There you go. This one looks nice. Gives you a more natural lighting. Tone mapper also helps out a bit sometimes when you tweak it up. Okay, let's turn these off now, for now. What we're gonna do now is start blending together these textures in Photoshop. Alright, let's open up Photoshop. I'll use CS4. Accept. And bring this one, this one, this one, masks, I think, and this one. There we go. All right. Okay, so first of all, we're gonna start off using this color texture as a base texture. Then over it, we're gonna have a bunch of layers overlaying on top of each other with different blending modes to have a nice effect. I'm not sure if this ambient occlusion that I got from WorldMachine would be nice. I mean, I probably could fix the levels for it, because right now it's a bit grayish. So clear level. contrast, maybe. And we'll see how it looks. If we don't like this texture here, we're still planning to render one in Mudbox. That'll probably look a lot more realistic and on which we'll have more control. So just copy, Control A, Control C, copy this image, create a new layer, Control V, and use it as a multiply. And I'll be starting to see some stuff here. Alright. These we'll use it later on. Let's try to add the flow texture. Control A, Control C for copy. Put it just over the color map and paste. Now try to find a good blending mode, and it's good to experiment with different blending modes, and it's better to go to start from this side. As a multiply, maybe you could invert it and try it out, but it's better to go on screen, overlay, these blending modes are probably the best for this kind of map. And turn down a bit the opacity. As you can see, overlay can give you some really interesting effects. Soft light as well. But as for the rest, probably soft light is the most appealing one. Obviously we need to zoom in just a bit more. Alright. Now, as you can see, it's a bit too sharp for a terrain and it will look a bit weird. It's like hair right now. What we could do is make two copies of these. One that's gonna be it's gonna have less opacity, but it's gonna be a bit more sharper, and another version is gonna have a bit more opacity and it's gonna be blurred. We're gonna use a blur filter on it. So just duplicate this layer. Okay, it's probably better to start naming the layers. This is AO from WorldMachine, ambient occlusion from WorldMachine, flow 1, flow 2, oops. Background, I'll just leave it the way it is. Alright. So the flow 1 is going to be the version that's going to be blurred out a bit. This one's going to have less opacity. This one is the one's going to be a bit sharper to give some nice and crisp detail, but subtle detail. So let's grab this one, get a filter, blur, Gaussian blur, turn down. There we go. And sometimes it's good to experiment by just inverting the values of a layer, and you get different kind of results by just inverting the values. This is the kind of result that you would get if you invert the flow maps. And obviously you get even more possibilities when you change the blending mode. Obviously soft light still looks the best in this case. Multiply could do a thing if maybe you could like turn down a bit the opacity. And this one, let's invert it again and see how it looks. But a sharper one, you know, you can blend in multiple ones. As you can see, you can achieve different effects, and it looks a bit more muddy. Now you can have a feeling that it's something that's flowing. But I'll probably keep it the way it was and use soft light. Put it at 20%. it's gonna be the same here. Alright, I guess we're done here with the flow maps. We can still do a lot of interesting things with the flow maps. We can still use it as a mask itself for different tile texture in Photoshop. But we'll just leave it the way it is. Now the depot mask texture, maybe we could use it to add some color variation to the background image. Now how we could use how could we use this? We could obviously create an effect here by just adding a hue saturation layer. Alright. And go to the channels. Remove this alpha map that we won't need anyways, and select the mask here and press Ctrl V, since we copied earlier this texture here. Now it's being used as a mask. So basically the white areas will be the areas where this layer here will affect the background image. So if I change the hue, it will change the hue on the white areas only. Same goes for the other sliders. And like I said earlier, the depot, the position layer is usually where the depot mods are deposed. As you can see, we can get some nice stuff here. Starting to look a bit more interesting. Let's try to fix a bit of saturation. A bit less saturated, because it'll look a bit weird if it's too saturated. Or maybe we can just change the color of the cliffs themselves. Why not? I mean, we want to work with something a bit more brownish, just like I did earlier on the Cryengine here. It's a lot darker than the ones I'm working on right now. Alright. And I got a bunch of applications, too much RAM being used. I'll probably have to close down Cryengine. Don't save. There we go. That's probably gonna help out my computer a bit. Okay, so let's just leave it this way. What's good about this with using masks is that you're working in a non-destructive way. You can always go back. Hey, maybe this the deposition color, I don't like it that much after trying it in the engine. I'll go back to Photoshop and just open up this effect and start tweaking the hue just a tiny bit. Now let's try out with the other. We can already start by closing depot flow mask. I'll just keep it here just in case. Alright, let's bring this in. Okay, like I said earlier, I wanted to change the color of the cliffs. Okay, let's create another layer, or actually no, it's gonna be the same thing. I'm gonna make another hue saturation layer, just over the background image. Okay, go to channels again, select this one, Control V, past it. As you can see, it's selected. It shows that the areas that are masked are the ones in red. So since we want the effect, we want that layer to affect the rocks. Right now it's affecting the grass. So if we start changing the values of this layer here, the hue saturation, it will only change the hue and saturation of the grass. So what we have to do is invert this mask. So press Ctrl E and it will invert the mask texture. Now that way it will only affect the rock. Okay, now I could start changing the hue of the rock. Let's desaturate a bit. Try and get something a bit more interesting. Okay, it's a a bit too saturated. This probably looks a bit better. Maybe we can go with the grayish one. Yeah, why not? We could obviously add another extra layer effect for the rocks. Brightness and contrast layer. Go to masks, channel, Control V, Control E, I in English. Sorry, I'm French, and by the way, I hope that my English isn't that of a problem. I hope that you guys can follow up this tutorial and that you can understand the main points of this tutorial, this video tutorial. Alright. Let's tweak a bit the brightness and contrast. Probably turn down the brightness a bit, since we can't do this with the hue and saturation layer. This step is very important because later on when you bring your terrain inside the engine, that's what the color map is what's gonna make your terrain look nice. So if you want something really consistent, your texture map needs to be worked really nicely, and this applies to any kind of model you're working on, not only terrains. Even if you're modeling a character, you could do a really great job doing the modeling itself, working on the polygons, but if you mess up with the texture maps, your whole model is messed up, and your results won't be that convincing. I've seen this a lot of times with other artists. They do an amazing job working on the model itself, but when it comes to texturing and doing a good choice of colors, that's where they mess it up, where they mess up the whole thing. So you need to spend a lot of time on texturing. Texturing, tweaking, and testing out in the engine, going back and forth. Uh, just this is a step that's very important. Alright, I guess this color is kind of nice. It's obviously better than the one that we had before. It was a bit. We could make the difference between the sand color and the cliff color. We basically had the same color for both, but now we can make a good difference about the sand and the cliffs. I'll obviously make it a bit darker, just a tiny bit, not too much. Alright, now that this is done, let's see, what else do we have? The beach, the sand maybe, yeah, we can still tweak the color for the sand, why not? Create a new layer for hue and saturation. We did a copy, Control C. All I did here is Control A to select the whole image, Control C to copy. Alright, here we go. Now Control V and Control E, since we wanted to affect only the sand. And always remember to rename your layers, because later on, if you're working in a studio environment, if you will not be the only person that's gonna tweak these textures, and you're working with in a team, and when someone else opens up your PSD file, and he won't really know what layer is for what kind of effect. So it's always good to rename, to to do some proper naming for your layers. Even though I never worked in the professional studio, I'm only doing this as a hobby myself, but it could be useful advice. Anyways, so this is the deposition map. So depot hue saturation. This one is for the rock. Brightness, contrast. Same here. Rock hue saturation. Oops. Take it a fix. I mean, even for yourself, it's very useful. I mean, sometimes you get some files you won't open for like a year or two, and then when you remember that you got, hey, I got this asset that I've done a long ago, and it's probably cool. It'd probably be nice if I could use it again, but later on you'll be like, damn, I don't really remember how I set up this PSD texture. Now, sand hue saturation. Okay. Now back to our sand. Let's see. Always good to experiment different values, and obviously I'm sure that the original value that I had before will probably be the best. I mean, going for something a bit more reddish will remind you a bit of the canyons, and that's not what we're going for. We're going for here for aggressive plain, aggressive landscape with some water and sea, a bit something similar to the one that I did in Cryengine. So we'll probably go for something that's a bit less saturated and colder. Let's see what else we could do. Maybe we could just turn down the lightness just a tiny bit, not too much. Needs to be subtle, but still showing up the effect a bit. It's always good to zoom out a bit and to see how it looks. And if you want to preview this directly on your terrain, you can already save this as a PSD file. Or let's see, this is in the texture folder, PSD, this is gonna be diffuse since it already has some shading applied to it, so we'll name it as a diffuse texture. Save. Okay. Let's see, now back to Mudbox. Now here we're done with applying the height map. Okay. Now we go to layers, paint, and we're gonna port the diffuse texture and apply it to our terrain here in Mudbox on our high poly terrain. So we go to import layer. This is another work I've been working on. Let's go to the tutorial folder. Terrain tutorial. Textures. And this is our diffuse texture. Open. Diffuse. You can choose a channel you want. That's what's nice about Mudbox. It's really straightforward and simple. Okay, fit to load texture. Fizable texture. What is UV underscore? Ooh, this is something new. Never had this error. Probably because it's a PSD folder, and I'll probably have to save it as a TGA. I'll save it as a TGA and try again. Now, delete this layer, which failed to import. Import layer, TGA. Hopefully it should work without a problem. And there you go. Already nicely applied to it. Starting to look nice. Okay, Now directly you can notice that we can see that the flow map is a bit too strong here. There's a bit too much contrast between the flow map and the grass patch. It needs to be subtle, and it needs to be something that you can see from far away. When you're close to it, you know you mustn't like really not see that you're on a flow map itself. That's how it is. So it is a bit too strong. What we're gonna do is turn it down just a bit in Photoshop. So turn down the opacity to 10% here. And same here, goes down to 10%. And there you go. It needs to be subtle. Save it as DGA again. Yes. Okay. There's probably your fresh selected, yeah. Okay. Now that's a bit better. Alright, what else we could do? Let's see how it looks with a cavity and a weight occlusion map. It'll probably look like this. Maybe even better, because later on I will even add an edge highlight map, which will highlight some of the small edges. And the small edges will be like, for example, here on this little part here, let me make a small brush. It will highlight what's here, over here, these small edges. And it will still give you an illusion, even though it's flat in the game, it will still give you an illusion of volume. Especially for Cryengine, since Cryengine doesn't support terrain normal mapping for your whole terrain. I mean, it does support normal mapping for detailed texture maps. But let's say you want to use a huge normal map that's at a high resolution, which we will use for the whole terrain, and you don't have that feature in Cryengine, even though you can do it in UDK. That's a feature that I'm hoping that Crytek will probably add to their SDK, since it's fairly new to the community. Now, what we could do now, we could start editing the terrain itself with a texture applied to it. I can start smoothing off some stuff that I don't want to see later. I can even start adding some extra detail. Let's see. In this case, a bit more stronger. Yeah. Yep, starting to look better. Now that I'm looking at it, I think that the grass texture, the grass color, isn't that great as well. Need to do a hue saturation on the grass color as well. Okay, so in this case, what we need to do, if you want to change the grass color, we need to create another hue saturation layer that will affect only the grass. So we have one that affected only the rocks. Now we need one that will affect only the grass. But the problem here, if we use this mask here that's affecting only the rocks, if we invert this, it will affect the grass and the sand. So what we will do is combine both these masks and make a new mask out of it that will only affect the grass. So create a new file, basically just little layers here. This one here is affecting grass only, but it's still got rock in it, so Control V, probably multiply could probably work. Control E, there we go. Now you got a mask that applies only to grass. Now Control E to fuse them together, Control A to select all, and Control C to copy, and we got our grass mask. Go create a new layer with a hue and saturation again. Go to channels, Control V, there we go, and obviously, yeah, that's it. can start fixing the hue. Let's deselect this. There we go. Then we can have a nice idea. Okay. Could probably tweak a bit the depot. Yeah. What's good about this is that right now we're using this as a normal blending. We could use different types of blendings, which will give us different kind of effects as well. You can see here, it gives us a nice patches, but still not something that I'm looking for. I'll probably keep it as a normal blending. Okay, now let's see, we got just checking out how my PSD file is set up and see if it's set up properly first. Grass hue saturation. Sharing grass, sand. What happens if I use these here? Nothing will change. Or it does change. But these are on the top anyways. Okay, we can see that we got some issues here though. We got this blue here that is something that we don't really want. How do we get rid of this blue here? Is probably by tweaking the layer blendings. So this is probably coming from here. And the rock hue saturation. Yes, it's from the grass hue saturation. Okay. This probably fix it a bit, but I won't be too picky on this part anyways, because this is basically the big color map that we'll see from far away. Save this again as a TGA. There we go. And refresh this paint layer. Alright. Let's try different light settings. because light settings in Maya contain color information as well, so they could affect the way you see how the diffuse texture is. And usually when you're texturing, it's probably much better if you work on a flat lighting environment. So you just right click and use flat lighting and you get to see the texture only applied on a mesh. And it is as well faster to render if you're working on a high poly mesh. But right now we're gonna be modifying the mesh a bit, so we need the shading, that way we can see where the volume is going. Obviously we need to turn off some stuff here, any kind of filter, tone mapping, okay. Okay, now we can start sculpting. Obviously this kind of detail wouldn't be possible to do in WorldMachine by itself. You have to sculpt some stuff, you need to, there's no program that can like generate magically the exact effect terrain, kind of terrain you're looking for. You have to paint some stuff manually. And it does make it look more interesting than the one here on the right, right? And later when we render an extra ambient occlusion map for the whole thing, it's gonna look a bit more better. You can also imagine if we worked on a higher resolution, 496 by 496 texture, it'll obviously look even more better. But you can also I can also say that it'll take a lot more time to work with, and it's gonna be harder to work with in Mudbox because the terrain resolution is gonna be way higher than 4 million. It's gonna be 60 million. Turn down a bit the strength for smaller detail. So what we're doing here, we're emphasizing some of the details to make it look a bit more interesting. Starting to look a bit more, starting to look a bit better. Obviously here you can see we got some sort of blob here and doesn't really look like terrain. So we're gonna work on it. nice to have some ambient occlusion. Same time, probably cavity map only. It's good too. But still makes things a bit slower. Let's see it fall off. Alright. And after working on this, it seems like we're going for a canyon-like terrain. It's a bit too much. Need to keep in mind that we're going to bring this into the engine, and we won't have this sort of tessellation inside the engine. But if possible, if we can bake all this detail into a texture map, it's gonna be just perfect. Let's change the lighting presets, something different. Let's see, we can still add a bit of stuff here. We want to make a slope. Turn down the strain just a tiny bit, and step spacing is nice enough. It's all about the silhouette as well. When you look at a terrain, you like having interesting shapes and silhouettes. So you can even use a large brush and start modifying the silhouette. But this is something that we could even do as well inside the engine, the game engine. Okay, gotta remove this peak a bit, so I'll have to smooth it up. Oh, it's a bit too smooth. So probably you'll use a scrap brush. There we go. Let's experiment with scrap brush and see real quick what it could do. Nah. Let's leave it the way it is. Okay. I guess we're almost done here. The next steps will be to render out the texture maps in Mudbox. We're just gonna extract an ambient occlusion, normal map, and an edge highlight map. And then we'll just apply those maps onto the diffuse texture to make it look a bit better. I mean, from this point of view, you can already imagine the sea all the way to the horizon. You got a beach and stuff. You can make some really interesting stuff with this terrain already. Or you can just like take this point of view here and put some sort of castle over here. Like have the sun behind it. Or have something like this. Could really look nice. obviously when I'll be done with this tutorial, I'll put up all the files that I made here. I'll put them, they'll be, you can just download them. You'll be able to download them on the internet without a problem for free. Okay, starting to look a bit more believable and a bit more realistic, I'd say. Let's try different lighting setups. See how it looks. This one looks kind of nice, a bit too desertish, but still. So this one was the one we were using earlier. This was with cavity and ambient occlusion. See Tom happen. Alright. I guess we're done here. Maybe we could, maybe I could smooth out some of these, some of this detail that makes, that kind of looks weird in my opinion. It looks like snakes or something. It's probably the purlin noise that I use in WorldMachine. Because later on they would be emphasized with the edge highlight map and it wouldn't look that nice. Turn on tile mapping. Alright. I think we're done here. Let's save this project just in case, because this one, I'll name it O2 underscore O2. There we go. Alright, now what's next here? We're gonna render out an ambient occlusion map first. So it's very easy. It's like how we did in the first part when we rendered out the displacement map. So all we gotta do is import the plane we used earlier, mesh, turn plane mesh base, okay. Rename this terrain LP. Alright. And go to maps, extract maps, new operation. This time it's gonna be ambient occlusion. Okay. So low resolution mesh selected, add selected. Alright. Then terrain HP, add selected. Okay. What else do we have? Now since we're testing it out, ambient occlusion is a bit slower to render than the displacement map, so I'm going for 512 by 512 first for test, and we need to set up the file where it's gonna be saved. So we could save it as a TGA format, Targa. This time it's gonna be Mudbox ambient occlusion AO. Save. Okay. Now, I think you already saw it, but I was talking earlier about rendering out an ambient occlusion map and a cavity map inside Mudbox, but you'll probably notice that there is no cavity map options. because actually you could do the cavity map by just rendering out the ambient occlusion map, but by just changing the filter size. Right now it's set up to render a normal ambient occlusion map when you have a filter size at 0.01. Uh, the smaller the filter size, the smaller the let's say, how do you call it? The smaller the shaded area by the occlusion, by the ambient occlusion. So if I want to render a cavity map, I'll probably use 0.00 maybe 5. That'll probably render out a cavity map. So let's first start out by rendering a simple ambient occlusion map. Shadow darkness, okay. Anti-aliasing is off. 512 by 512, everything's good. Let's just set this to fast. Raycasting. And if you remember earlier when we had a problem rendering our displacement map, it was cut off at some point. We need to set up how do you say? Let me see. The height, the perfect height for it to encompass the whole mesh. So earlier I think we used 100, I think. I don't really remember, but we can still test it out since it's fairly fast to render. And we could already try an extra. I'm just checking the settings. Okay. Do an extraction. I'll pause this out a bit and we'll be back when it's done rendering. Or actually, it is done rendering. It was pretty fast actually. There we go. Okay, now that it's done rendering, let's check out the mesh, the texture we got. There we go. We can see that it's cut off. We still got the same problem here, so we gotta need to use a higher value for the search distance. I'm guessing it's gonna be 100 and oh yeah, I remember. Not since we imported our displacement map and used a multiplier on it, it was a multiplier of 150. So we'll probably have to use something like 155 as a multiplier to encompass the whole mesh. There we go. Yeah, I'm doing this tutorial at the same time while I'm learning some stuff and discovering some tips. This is the funny part about it. And I hope I'm right about this thing here. That'll probably solve some rendering time later in the future. And there we go. I think it should be perfect. So this is an ambient occlusion at 512 by 512 in fast mode, rendering this in fast mode. Okay, I guess we can already start rendering this in high quality. (2048 by 2048). Let's turn on anti-aliasing. Same here, 2048 by 2048. And I'll probably have to pause the videos for this time when I'm rendering. Alright, I'll see you guys later when it's done rendering.